The storm that brought fire. The mountains of Valor were not merely tall. They were ancient. They rose from the earth like the bones of some forgotten titan, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky with indifferent cruelty. Snow clung to their crowns even in summer. The wind never truly stopped there. It whispered through pine needles, screamed along stone ridges, and moaned through narrow passes like something alive and grieving. Few chose to live near such heights. Fewer still chose to live alone. Alara Vane did both. Her cottage stood where forest met stone, a small, stubborn structure of timber and field rock reinforced by patient hands. Smoke curled from its chimney in thin, steady lines, a quiet defiance against the vast wilderness pressing in from every side. She had built the place herself. Not because she was particularly strong, but because she had needed something that did not collapse when life struck it. The valley below remembered her differently. They remembered the young woman who once laughed in the summer markets, the wife of a border soldier who swore the wars between lords would soon end, the woman who believed in ordinary futures, children, harvests, soft evenings beside a hearth that held no ghosts. That life ended with a folded cloak and a sealed letter bearing a wax crest. No body returned. Just words. Bravery. Sacrifice. Duty. Empty things that did not warm a bed at night. Grief hollowed her quietly. It did not scream or shatter dishes or curse the sky. It simply removed color from the world one shade at a time until nothing felt anchored anymore. So she left. Left the valley's sympathetic looks, left the pity, left the gossip that followed widows like a shadow. The mountains asked nothing of her. And she asked nothing in return. The day the storm came, the air had felt wrong since dawn. Too heavy. Too still. Birdsong stuttered and then ceased entirely. Even the wind held its breath. Alara noticed these things. Living alone in wild country sharpened a person's awareness. She had learned the subtle shifts that preceded danger. The way deer moved deeper into trees, the way squirrels vanished from open branches, the metallic taste in the air before lightning split it apart. By late afternoon, clouds gathered like bruises over the peaks. By dusk, the sky broke. Thunder cracked so violently it rattled the beams of her cottage. Rain did not fall in gentle sheets, it hurled itself sideways, driven by winds that howled like wolves. Alara secured the shutters one by one, bracing them against the force. The fire in her hearth roared brighter as gusts found tiny cracks in the timber. She moved calmly. Storms did not frighten her. There was something almost honest about them. They came, they raged, they left. They did not pretend to be anything else. She had just finished securing the final latch when she heard it. A sound too thin to be thunder. Too sharp to be wind. A cry. She froze. It came again, brief, strangled, almost swallowed by the storm. Pain. Alara's fingers tightened around the iron latch. Her mind searched for reason, a fox caught in a trap, a goat fallen against rock, wolves tearing into prey. No, there was something else in it. Something that scraped against instinct. Another flash of lightning illuminated the forest beyond her door, turning rain into silver needles for the briefest second. The cry came again. Closer now. Against better judgment, and perhaps because she had long ago stopped valuing her own safety above compassion, Alara grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and pulled the door open. The wind nearly tore it from her hands. Rain soaked her instantly, plastering dark hair against her face as she stepped onto the narrow clearing before the cottage. "Where are you?" she called over the storm, though she expected no answer. Lightning flashed, and in that blinding white moment she saw it. Near the roots of a fallen pine, tangled in broken branches and mud, was a small shape writhing weakly. Wings! Torn wings! The world seemed to tilt. The next lightning strike burned the image deeper. Midnight blue scales glistening wet. A slender neck arched in pain. And eyes far too large for its narrow skull, glowing faintly like embers trapped beneath ash. A dragon hatchling. Not one from polished tapestries or ancient stone carvings. Not the massive sky tyrants sung about in half-believed legends. This one was small. Young. Bleeding. Alone. Alara forgot the storm. Forgot the cold. Forgot for a suspended heartbeat every warning story she had ever heard. The hatchling tried to lift itself when it saw her. It bared tiny, needle-like teeth and released a hiss that might have been threatening under different circumstances. Instead, it trembled. It attempted to stand, collapsed back into the mud. Smoke flickered weakly from its nostrils, no more than a dying spark. Someone had hunted it. The evidence lay plain. Shallow blade cuts across its back, an arrowhead graze along its flank, the unnatural angle of one wing twisted beneath debris. And if hunters had found a hatchling, they had likely found its mother first. Something inside Alara tightened painfully. She knew what it meant to be left by war. The hatchling's glowing eyes locked onto hers. Fear, defiance, and beneath both, exhaustion. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, though the wind devoured her words. She approached slowly, mud sucking at her boots. The hatchling snapped weakly at the air between them, jaws barely reaching her sleeve. It lacked the strength even for hatred. Alara dropped the iron pokers. Kneeling in the mud, she slid her arms beneath its trembling body. Heat struck her skin immediately. Dragons were creatures of fire, even newborns. Its warmth burned through rain-soaked fabric, startling and alive. The hatchling tried once more to resist. A thin hiss. A flicker of smoke. Then its body sagged against her chest. It weighed less than she expected. Too light. Far too light for something meant to rule skis. Alara carried it inside. The cottage filled with new scent, wet scales, iron blood, and faint smoke curling into the air. She laid the hatchling near the hearth and fed the flames until the room glowed gold and steady. Steam rose from its scales as rainwater evaporated. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd feared. The wing joint was fractured, membrane torn, but not beyond hope. Cuts along its back were shallow but numerous, testing strikes perhaps, hunters confirming a kill. Or savoring it. Rage flickered in her chest, surprising in its intensity. She set it aside. Anger could wait. Care came first. The hatchling stirred weakly as she cleaned its wounds. It growled when cloth touched broken bone, snapping feebly toward her wrist. "I know," she murmured softly, "I know." Her hands were steady. They had stitched flesh before. Her husband, once after a border skirmish years ago. She remembered how he had laughed through pain to keep her from worrying. She did not let herself remember the last time she had touched him. She worked until the bleeding slowed. She splinted the wing carefully, using carved wood and linen strips torn from her own spare garments. The hatchling's ember eyes never left her face. Not with trust. Not yet. But with growing confusion. When she finally leaned back, exhaustion overtook the creature. Its narrow head lowered to the wooden floor. The glow in its eyes dimmed. For one terrible second, Alara thought it had died. But then she saw the faint rise and fall of its sides. Alive. Barely. She sank against the wall beside the hearth and closed her eyes, rainwater still dripping from her clothes. Outside, the storm began to weaken. Inside, something ancient slept in fragile safety. Morning light filtered cautiously through frost-laced windows. Alara woke stiff, muscles aching from sleeping upright. The fire had burned low. The place beside the hearth was empty. Her heart lurched violently. She stood too quickly, scanning the room. A low rumble vibrated from the shadowed corner near the door. The hatchling crouched there, wing-bound awkwardly, body coiled tight. Watching her, it had dragged itself away during the night. Instinct demanded distance from vulnerability. Its eyes burned brighter in the pale dawn. Alive, stronger, and assessing. Alara did not approach immediately. She knelt near the hearth instead and began preparing water in a shallow wooden bowl. After setting it midway between them, she stepped back. The hatchling stared at the bowl. Then at her. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by faint crackling embers. Finally, cautiously, it limped forward. Each step was careful, guarded. It sniffed the water. Then drank. Alara exhaled slowly, a breath she hadn't realized she held. "You're stubborn," she said softly. The hatchling lifted its head. A faint thread of smoke curled from its nostrils, not in threat but in simple existence. It did not leave that day. Nor the next. The door remained unbarred. The forest called. But each time it limped toward the threshold, it paused. looked back at her, and stayed. On the third day, she found blood on the snow outside. Not the hatchling. Fresh. Humans. Tracks led toward the tree line. Hunters were still searching. Inside the cottage, the hatchling sensed her unease immediately. Its body tensed. Smoke thickened faintly in the air. That was when the knock came. Hard. Demanding. Alara Vane, a man called through the door. We track a wounded beast, it came this way. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening. She had faced worse than men with crossbows. Behind her, the hatchling shifted. Small, injured, but heat gathered faintly in its throat. Alara stepped outside before they could push in. 3 men stood in the clearing, leather armor darkened by melted frost. There are no beasts here, she said evenly. One smirked. Tracks say otherwise. Tracks lie. Another man's gaze slid to the cottage roof. Dragons fetch coin, even small ones. The word hung heavy in the air. Dragon. Alara met his eyes. You'll find none. They stepped forward. From inside the cottage came a sudden sharp crackle. Heat rolled outward. A thin plume of smoke curled skyward. The hunters froze. That's impossible, one whispered. No hatchling survives alone. Alara did not look back. She held their gaze with iron steadiness. Then perhaps, she said quietly, you should fear what did. The forest seemed to lean closer. For a long, suspended moment, tension coiled thick as rope. Then the largest hunter spat into the snow. Not worth dying for, he muttered, if its mother's near. They retreated. Quickly. Alara waited until they vanished before returning inside. The hatchling stood in the center of the room, smoke still curling from its jaws. Exhausted, but defiant. She knelt before it. You don't have to stay, she whispered. The hatchling limped closer, and very deliberately lowered itself at her feet. Not collapsing, not hiding, choosing. Outside, the mountains stood silent. Inside, a wild dragon hatchling decided that of all the brutal vastness of the world, this human woman was home. When the world came climbing, the mountains remembered everything. They remembered blood spilled into their snow. They remembered the thunder of wings long vanished from their skis. They remembered the era when fire ruled the peaks and no human dared build where Alara's cottage now stood. And now, after generations of silence, fire had returned. The growing flames. Winter did not come gently that year. It descended like a drawn blade. Snow gathered along the roof of Alara's cottage in heavy layers. Ice sealed the narrow stream she used for water, forcing her to break through each morning with steady, patient blows. Inside, the hearth rarely cooled. And beside it, the hatchling grew. He no longer fit comfortably in the space he once curled into. His limbs lengthened first, awkwardly, like a colt's, followed by the thickening of muscle along his chest and haunches. The midnight blue of his scales deepened toward obsidian, catching firelight in subtle hues of violet and silver. The splinted wing healed crooked at first, then stronger under careful stretching. A faint pale scar traced the membrane, shimmering like frost when he extended it toward warmth. Alara watched the change with equal parts wonder and dread. Dragons did not remain small. Dragons did not remain unnoticed. He followed her constantly now. When she split wood, he crouched nearby, tail coiled neatly around himself, eyes tracking every motion of the axe as though studying an unfamiliar ritual. When she mended clothing by lamplight, he lay close enough that heat radiated through her skirts, steady and comforting. At night, when her dreams turned restless, when old battlefields rose unbidden and she heard again the phantom echo of war drums, he moved closer without fail. Not touching, but near enough that warmth anchored her to the present. She never named him aloud, but in her thoughts she called him Ember, because even in sleep sparks danced faintly between his teeth. The first hunt. He began hunting on his own when snow fell deep enough to drive deer lower along the slopes. Alara had worried, not because she doubted his strength, but because she feared what might follow if others saw him. The first time he left without limping, wing beating steady and true, her chest tightened in a way she had not allowed herself to feel since her husband marched away to war. Waiting was worse than any storm. She stood in the clearing until the cold drove needles into her fingers. The mountains remained silent. Then at dusk, shadow passed over her like a moving cloud. Ember descended awkwardly but successfully, landing with a heavy thud that shook frost from the nearby pines. His chest swelled with pride, claws gripping the snow. He had blood along his jaws. But he had left the carcass far from the cottage. Instinct. Or consideration. He approached her slowly, eyes bright with something almost childlike. Approval. Alara exhaled in relief she hadn't realized she held. You'll grow too fast for this place, she murmured, brushing her hand against the side of his neck. He rumbled softly in response. The sound vibrated through her palm. Rumors in the valley. Below the mountain, the valley whispered. Hunters returned with stories of scorched earth near high slopes. Shepherds spoke of shadows crossing the moon. One man swore he saw eyes glowing between trees large as lantern flames. Fear spread quickly. Fear always did. The Valley Lord Aldrich Marin was not a foolish man, but neither was he patient with threats. His lands had survived border skirmishes, famine, and plague. He would not tolerate dragons. Word reached him through frightened mouths. A beast nested above Valor, and a widow sheltered it. The soldiers arrived. They came at dawns. Not hunters this time. 6 armored soldiers bearing the black and silver crest of the Valley Lord. Alara saw them long before they reached the clearing. Ember sensed them first, his head lifting sharply, pupils narrowing to slits. Smoke curled faintly from his nostrils. They're coming, she said quietly. His body tensed. He was no longer small enough to hide easily. Even crouched, his back brushed the rafters if he stood fully upright inside the cottage. Alara stepped outside before the soldiers could knock. The captain removed his helmet. Widow Vanes, he said evenly, you harbor a dragon. I shelter what was dying, she replied. It no longer appears near deaths. No. Steel glinted as 2 men shifted grips on their spears. The captain studied her carefully. You understand what dragons become. Oh yes. And you choose this. Oh yes. Inside, Ember growled. Not high-pitched. Not uncertain. Deep. The door shuddered as heat expanded the wood. The captain's gaze sharpened. Stand aside. Alara did not move. No. One soldier stepped toward the door. It burst outward in a splintering crack. Ember emerged in a blur of muscle and dark scales, wings spreading wide despite the cold air that cut across them. The clearing filled with sudden heat. Snow hissed and melted beneath his claws. He positioned himself between Alara and the soldiers. Injured wing half spread. Body trembling not from fear but from restraint. The captain's jaw tightened. It protects you. He chooses to. Dragons were not commanded. They were not leashed. That truth unsettled the men more than flame. One soldier lunged. Ember reacted faster than thought. A focused jet of white fire scorched the earth inches from the man's boots, melting snow into steam so thick it obscured vision. The soldier stumbled back, swearing. The forest held its breath. The captain raised a hand. Enough. He stared at Ember for a long moment. Do you believe you can hide him forever? He asked Alara quietly. No. Then you understand this will not end here. I do. Something like reluctant respect flickered across the captain's face. He sheathed his sword. We report to the Lord. They retreated. But not in panic. In calculation. Winter deepens. After the soldiers left, the air around the cottage felt different. Not safe. Waiting. Ember grew restless. He flew farther now, testing thermals along the ridges. His wings strengthened daily, their span casting longer shadows across the clearing. He returned each night. Always. Even when he could have remained in caves high among the peaks. He chose the cottage. He chose her. Alara felt pride in that. And fear. Because choice would soon demand sacrifice. The night of northern lights. The sky shimmered green and silver one late winter evening, the northern lights spilling across darkness like slow-moving rivers of ghostly flame. Ember landed heavily, chest rising in visible steam. Instead of retreating inside, he lowered himself fully to the snow. Head bowed. Waiting. Alara approached slowly. Understanding dawned. Her breath caught. You're certain, she whispered. He did not move. She climbed carefully onto his back, fingers gripping the ridges along his spine. Heat pulsed beneath her palms. Ember leapt. For one dizzying heartbeat they fell. Then wings caught air. The world dropped away. Valor spread beneath them in silver and shadow, frozen rivers gleaming like fractured glass. Wind tore laughter from her throat, a sound she had not made in years. Up there, above grief, above rumor, above fear. She felt alive again. Ember banked clumsily at first, then steadier. He did not soar far, but far enough. When they landed, something unspoken had deepened between them. Trust, not born of rescue, but of shared sky. The Lord's decision. In the valley, Lord Aldrich Marin listened to the captain's report. A dragon, defending a human, not attacking, not rampaging. The detail unsettled him more than violence would have. Power that chose restraint was harder to predict. He considered sending 60 men, then 100. But dragons in legend did not fall easily to numbers. And if others of its kind still lived, war might follow. So he made a different choice. He wrote to the crowns. If dragons were returning, it would not be his problem alone. The gathering storm. Snow began to melt. With thaw came movement. Riders arrived in the valley bearing royal insignia. Knights in polished armor. A woman at their head whose bearing spoke not of panic, but of purpose. Up in the mountains, Ember felt them before Alara saw them. His wings spread instinctively. Smoke thickened in the cottage air. They're not hunters, she murmured, watching the formation climb in disciplined silence. He rumbled low in response. The world had begun climbing toward them. And this time it would not turn back easily. Ember stepped forward beside her as armored figures entered the clearing. He did not crouch. He did not threaten. He stood, taller than before, stronger, his presence undeniable. Alara felt the weight of history pressing in from all sides. This was no longer about hiding. It was about what came next. The leading knight removed her helms. Her expression was calm, measured, not fearful. Widow Alara Vane, she called upward, we come not as hunters. Ember's growl rolled like distant thunder. Alara placed a steady hand against his foreleg. Then speak, she said. And in that clearing, beneath peaks older than crowns and kingdoms, the future began to take shape. The roar that changed the world. Spring did not arrive gently in Valor. It tore winter apart. Snow split under rushing meltwater. Rivers roared down mountainsides, carrying ice and memory with them. The forest breathed again, cautious at first, then fuller with each warming day. But something else moved beneath the thaw. Expectation. The crown had come, and the world would not remain as it had been. The envoy of silver. The royal column halted at the edge of Alara's clearing. Not in panic, not in arrogance, in discipline. There were 12 knights in polished steel, cloaks bearing the sigil of the High King, a silver phoenix rising from flame. Their horses stamped nervously, steam curling from flared nostrils as Ember's heat radiated across the clearing. At their head stood a woman who removed her helm before stepping forward. Her hair was bound tightly at the nape of her neck. A thin scar traced her jawline, old, clean, deliberate. Her armor bore scratches that spoke of battle, not ceremony. She walked alone. A calculated risk. I am Lady Seraphine Valcrest, she called clearly, voice of His Majesty High King Edric of Averend. Her voice did not tremble. She stopped well beyond Ember's striking range and removed one gauntlet, letting it fall into the snow. An open hand. Peace. Ember's wings shifted slightly, half spread behind Alara like a living shield. Smoke drifted lazily from his nostrils, but there was no flame. Alara stood tall beside him. You have climbed far, she replied evenly. Speak your purpose. Seraphine inclined her head, not in submission but in acknowledgement. Dragons have been sighted across the northern ranges. Not one, not two, many. A murmur rippled through the nights behind her, quickly stilled. The age of their silence appears to be ending. The words carried weight heavier than armor. Alara felt Ember's muscles tense faintly. Not in fear, in awareness. You assume this one belongs to your concern, Alara asked. Seraphine's eyes flicked briefly toward Ember, studying him with unmistakable interest, but not greed. No, she said carefully, I assume he belongs to himself. Silence stretched. Wind moved through the pines. Snowmelt trickled softly down stone. Seraphine continued. For centuries, dragons were treated as calamity, hunted when weak, worshipped when strong, feared always. Her gaze returned to Alara. But reports say this dragon defends you, not from hunger, not from instinct. She let the implication settle. Choice. Ember lowered his head slightly, golden eyes narrowing as if measuring her truth. You did not come to kill him, Alara said. No, nor to chain him. A pause. Seraphine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There are those within the crown who would argue for such measures, she admitted. Power unsettles thrones. A knight behind her shifted uncomfortably. But I was sent because I have seen what war costs. Her eyes darkened briefly with memory. And I would avoid a war that cannot be won. Echoes in the sky. Ember stepped forward then. One heavy step. Snow hissed and melted beneath his claws. Night stiffened. Seraphine did not retreat. He lowered his massive head until it hovered just above her height. Studying her, the air grew warmer. Thicker. Alara felt her pulse in her throat. This was the edge of everything. If flame burst now, if steel answered, the mountains would burn red before sunset. Seraphine slowly lifted her unarmored hand, palm outward. I will not strike you, she said quietly. Ember inhaled, and in that breath the clearing trembled. Then he lifted his head skyward and roared. The sound tore through the mountains like a living thing. It shook snow from distant ridges. It sent birds scattering in frantic waves from the treetops. The roar was not rage. It was declaration. It echoed once, twice, then faintly. An answer from far beyond the eastern peaks. A second roar rolled across the horizon. Lower, older. Alara's breath caught. Another answered from the north. Then another. Distant, but undeniable. The knight stared at the sky in stunned silence. Seraphine exhaled slowly. So it begins, she murmured. The choice. The sound of other dragons lingered in the air long after echoes faded. Ember lowered his head slowly. His gaze turned toward the distant mountains. Toward his kind. Something ancient stirred in his posture. A pull older than memories. Alara felt it. She stepped closer. You're not alone, she whispered. He turned his head toward her. Golden eyes met human browns. In them she saw conflict. The sky called. The mountains called. But so did the hearth. So did her voice in the quiet evenings. So did the place where he had first learned warmth without fear. Seraphine watched the exchange with careful stillness. You cannot hide him now, she said softly, nor should you. Alara did not look away from Ember. I never wished to hide him, she replied. The truth of that surprised even her. She had wanted only to protect. But protection had become something larger. Ember shifted again. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved. Not toward the distant mountains. Not toward the nights. He stepped until his massive body stood fully beside Alara. Not behind. Not ahead. Beside. His wing brushed her shoulder gently, careful despite its strength. The choice was visible to all. Seraphine's lips curved faintly. He has answered, she said. The crown's offer. Seraphine knelt then. Not fully armor prevented it, but enough that steel kissed snow. In the name of High King Edric of Averend, I propose an accord. Her voice carried clearly. Dragons return to the world. Humanity cannot unmake that truth. We may either meet it with blind steel. She glanced briefly at her knights. or with open hands. She looked up at Ember, and at the one he has chosen. Alara's throat tightened. You expect treaties, she asked. No, Seraphine replied, I expect beginnings. She rose slowly. The crown will not hunt dragons who do not attack our people. In return, we ask only communication, warning when territories are claimed, acknowledgement that villages are not prey. Ember's tail flicked once in thought. You speak as though he commands others, Alara said. He may not yet, Seraphine answered, but dragons do not ignore strength. Her gaze returned to Ember. You survived hunters, you survived winter, you roar and others answer. A beat of silence. You are not small anymore. Ember's chest rose. Vel, steam curled from his nostrils. He understood tone if not words. Alara placed her hand gently against his foreleg. What do you want, she whispered. Not for herself. For him. His gaze lifted once more to the distant peaks. Another faint roar drifted across the wind. Then he did something that made even the hardened knights inhale sharply. He folded his wings and lowered himself to the ground. Not in submission, but in calm. A statement of restraint. Seraphine nodded slowly. Then let it be known, she said, voice carrying across the clearing, that the first dragon of the returning has chosen peace beside humanity. Fire-tested. Peace, however, is never uncontested. Not all within the crown celebrated restraint. Not all lords favored coexistence. Within weeks, rumors spread beyond Valor. A dragon allied with a widow. Dragons gathering in the norths. Whispers turned to fear. Fear to plotting. One night beneath a moon half veiled in cloud, torches appeared again along the lower slopes. Not knights. Not disciplined ranks. Mercenaries. Crossbows. Barrels of pitch. Alara saw them too late. Ember sensed them first. His growl rolled low and lethal. They won't stop, she said quietly. He moved ahead of her without waiting this time. The mercenaries crested the clearing's edge with fire-tipped bolts ready. Loose, someone shouted. The first volley flew. Ember moved like lightnings. Wings snapped open. Flame erupted not in wild chaos, but in controlled arcs that incinerated bolts midair. Pitch barrels ignited before they struck ground. Panic erupted among the attackers. But Ember did not pursue fleeing men. He did not slaughter them. He roared. A blast of sound so powerful it flattened snow and sent mercenaries tumbling backward in terror. And then, he took flight. Not alone. From distant ridges, shapes rose. 2, 3, 4 dragons, smaller than ancient legends, but vast enough to darken stars, descended into the sky above Valor. They did not attack. They circled, watching, witnessing. The mercenaries fled screaming into the trees. The dragons did not follow. Ember landed heavily before Alara once more. Chest heaving, eyes bright not with bloodlust, but with decision. Seraphine arrived 2 days later with reinforcements and apologies. The crown will deal with those responsible, she swore. Alara believed her. Because the alternative meant endless war. The new age. Seasons turned. Dragons nested high in the peaks again. They did not descend upon villages. They did not burn fields. But neither did they hide. Ember grew larger still, no longer a hatchling, no longer merely young. His wingspan cast shadows that reached the forest edge. His roar became a sound that rolled across valleys like thunder. Yet every dusk, no matter how far he ranged, he returned. He landed beside the cottage that had once barely contained him. He lowered his head so Alara could rest her palm against warm scales. Children from distant villages would one day climb Valor under careful escort to witness what had once been myth. They would see a dragon and a woman standing together in quiet understanding. Not master and beast. Not conqueror and conquered. But allies. It began with a storm. With a choice made in mud and lightning. A widow who refused to let something die simply because the world feared it. and a wild dragon hatchling who decided that among all the vastness of sky and stone, home was not a place of dominance. It was a place of mercy. Ember would one day tower over mountains. His name would be spoken in courts and carved into histories. But in the quiet evenings, when firelight flickered and wind whispered against timber walls, he would still curl near the hearths, still listen to the steady rhythm of the human heart that had first chosen him. And as long as that heart beats, he would stay. Forever.